Welcome to Blackbird Writers Presents. I am Tracy S. Phillips, and today I am speaking with Peggy Williams. She has co-written 2 award-winning mystery novels with Mary Jo Johnson. She has also co-written a short film and several stories with Christine Desmet. The Stone Carver made its debut in February of 2023 at the Door County Film Festival. She has taught in the Madison Public School System for over 35 years, and she's taught creative writing for Madison College and the UW-Madison's Continuing Studies program. Courting the Sun is Peggy's debut solo endeavor, a historical fiction novel, and she is also an avid genealogist, a pursuit that informs much of her writing. And today we're here to discuss Courting the Sun, which hit the shelves in May this year. Welcome, Peggy.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, I'm so excited to discuss this book. It was wonderful and so well written. The historical part of it, just like drew me in and put me in that time period. I loved it.
Thank you.
So the story is mostly about young Sylviane d'Aubert. Now, am I pronouncing that one right?
So I would say Sylviane d'Aubert.
D'Aubert, okay. She is a 16-year-old girl living in the late 1600s, and she receives an invitation to attend the court of King Louis XIV. So I'm curious because in your bio, you talk about being an avid genealogy studier. How did that inform some of your writing?
Yeah, so I think it's that historical research that got me into it. I've done a lot of research into my French-Canadian background, and I discovered that a number of my 7th and 8th great-grandmothers immigrated from France to Canada, to the Quebec and Montreal area. And they immigrated under a program that is now referred to as the Filles du Roi, the Daughters of the King. And they weren't real daughters of the king, they were just sponsored by the king. And it got me to wondering about why a young woman would leave everything she knows and everyone she knows and cross the Atlantic on one of those horrible ships and go to a very strange, very rough and raw land. And so I decided to create a fictional character that is really unlike any of my great 7th and 8th great grandmothers, but I wanted to have fun with the character. So that thus Sylviane was born.
That's so interesting. Yes, why would you just get up and leave everything? And the journey on ship took 7 weeks about to get to
sometimes a little less, often longer.
right.
And many of the women went because they were very poor, maybe indigent or orphans. They their families maybe couldn't afford a dowry except for the oldest daughter. So there were a lot of pragmatic reasons why they went. But like I said, I just wanted to have fun with it.
Yeah, no, and so it's really interesting, and you create the world back then so beautifully. So is Sylviane, the main character, is she based on a real person then?
No, she's entirely fictional. She does live in the town of Amiens, France, which some of my ancestors came from. But she and her mother and the people within her orbit are totally fictional.
Wow, okay. Very, very cool. So let's talk about Sylviane a little bit. As you say, she was from the small town of Amiens, and she's in love with a young man named Etienne. He's a shoemaker. Let's talk about their relationship a little bit.
Yeah, so Sylvian and Etienne were really good friends growing up. Sylvian's a bit of a wild child. She loves to climb trees. She likes to swim in rivers and ponds. She likes to ride on the horse with Etienne. He falls in love with her long before she falls in love with him, and even before she realizes there's anything going on between them. She's kind of conflicted because he would be a very good man to marry, but she's always had this dream of marrying somebody wealthy, living in a big house, and he doesn't really fit that dream.
Yeah, I loved how everyone around her is saying, well, when are you guys going to get married? Or, well, of course, you're saving yourself for him. You know?
Yeah.
And she's like, oh, really?
Yes.
But and he does, I don't think it's giving too much away to say he does unofficially ask her for her hand.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And
But
one
she
of the big
doesn't,
questions is she going to accept?
right. So another big player in this book is the king, King Louis XIV. He plays a huge role. And my Google research showed that he had many mistresses and as many as maybe 19 children, although they're not really sure.
Yeah.
Yeah. What kinds of fictional liberties did you take with the king and some of the other characters at court?
So pretty much everybody at court in my story is based on real life. Obviously, Louis was his brother Philippe, Philippe's wife Henriette, and Athenae, which should be pronounced Athenae. They were all very real people, and I most everything that I put into the story around them is real. Athenae had several, maybe even 5 children by Louis, but she was already married. She had 2 children by her husband. She was very much a social and a power climber. Louis, he was a very complex man. He did so much for France, raising the economy, investing in the arts and the sciences. He required that the streets of Paris be lit at night, and that they be cleaned. But he was very much a despot. He also required that everybody be Catholic, whether they wanted to or not. He persecuted people if they didn't follow the way he wanted things to go. He built that beautiful, beautiful Versailles, but it was at the expense of the people because he would tax the people to pay for what he wanted. So most everything that I put into there is based on reality. What's fictional is once I inserted Sylvienne into the story and put her in and created a few minor characters like her maid. There's a man in there, Carafel, who is one of the aides to the king and helps her get situated. But most everybody else is based on reality, and I tried to keep it as close to real as I could.
I mean, that kind of brings in the whole question of obviously writing historical fiction. You need to do your research.
Oh, yeah.
You can't have, bad details in there, or things that just really did not occur historically. But I think some of the liberties that you can take are with people, with common people who aren't.
Right.
Yeah. So what kind of, research did you have to do besides the genealogy to get your details right?
So I had been to France, but not for several decades. And going back really wasn't an option for me. So most of my research, a lot of books. There's books on Louis, there's books on Philippe, there's books on Athénée, and a lot of things online. You can do a virtual walkthrough of Versailles. You know, I could find out what life was like back in the 1600s in Paris. So they had really, really good records back then. The king kept very good records. People kept journals. There was a lot of letter writing that went back and forth. And that was their main means of communication. And Philippe's second wife, who doesn't really make it into the story, was such an avid letter writer. She probably wrote a half a dozen to a dozen letters a day. One of the characters in the story, Madame Savigny, was known to be kind of a local gossip, and she wrote letters to her daughter that were preserved. And you know, she wrote about people. There was a newspaper at the time, and there was a lot about court going on in the newspaper. People back then, especially the people who were very educated and part of the literary salon crowd, would write something called pen portraits. And pen portraits were kind of scathing descriptions of people and their goings on. And sometimes they would identify who they're writing about, or sometimes, as in my story, as they would make up a name, but everybody knew who they were talking about. So there's a lot of literature that came from that era.
Wow, that's really cool, and I'm sure that's available in libraries and online as everything too. So the king sends Sylviane to live with his favorite mistress, Athénée. So let's talk about that relationship a little bit, and Sylviane and because Athénée, I'm trying to pronounce it right. Just their relationship makes up a big part of the story, and some of the gossip about it is not good. You know, her mom doesn't like her being there. Let's talk about that a little.
Yeah, so she's, you know, Sylviane's young. She's only 16. She's very naive, but she is quite beautiful. And she gets thrust into this atmosphere with the mistress who holds a lot of power. I mean, she probably even holds more power than the queen. You know, the queen's role was to have babies for the king that would be legitimate. And so the king spent a lot of time with his mistress and slept with her. But he also had made a vow that he would wake up every morning in the queen's bed. So regardless of how late he was out at night or early dawn morning, he would crawl back into the queen's bed in the morning. But Athénée, she was the kind of woman that once she came to power as his sort of consort, she commanded a room. And she would walk into a room and people would bow and curtsy and stand just as if she were the queen. So when Sylviane is thrust into that situation, it's just a very kind of different life for her and a very different way of living. And at first it's exciting. It's like, you know, it's parties and it's literary salons and, you know, fabulous dresses and that sort of thing. But then she eventually starts to see some of the dark side of it. And I don't want to get too deep into it because that comes out in the story, but life for the mistress is not 100% wonderful. And she is at the beck and call of the king. And in some uncomfortable ways, you know, she does have a baby in the story, and that is a unique time for Sylviane. And then have to give up her baby.
But Athénée accepts that role.
Oh yeah, because she wants the power that comes with it. But the interesting thing, and I don't think it's in the story that I have, she replaced another mistress. And the other mistress, so Louis had an affair with Philippe's young wife. And he was trying to hide that affair because his mother was still alive at the time. Both, him and Philippe's mother. And so he pretended to have an affair with Louise Lavalier, I think was her name. And while he was pretending to have an affair with her, he fell in love with her. Well, then Athénée became the maid of honor to Louise. And eventually the king fell in love with her, and it displaced Louise and sent her off at her choice to a convent. And Athénée stayed as mistress for, I don't know, 10, maybe 12 years, and eventually was replaced by a friend of hers, the woman that she had hired to be the governess for the children she had between her and the king. And that woman was a very religious woman and had been married before. And the queen, when the queen died, that woman refused to go to bed with the king if they weren't married. So they got married secretly. And that displaced Athénée, who got sent away. And that woman never became queen, but she was kind of the consort of the king for the rest of his life.
Wow. All these
Yeah,
secret
a lot of
things.
that doesn't, right, a lot of that doesn't make it into this book because the time frame is, doesn't allow for that. He was king he was 5 years old when he became king.
Right.
21 when he reached his majority and began to rule, and he lived to be in his mid-70s.
Yeah. Wasn't he was one of the longest reigning kings of France?
Yeah. In fact, he outlived his son and his grandson, and Louis XV was his great-grandson.
Wow.
So, yeah.
I love it. I don't know, looking for my next question. I'm sure that you came across some things in your research that that you couldn't use, like what you were just describing. But what is your favorite historical nugget from your research?
So I think my favorite historical nugget, and it didn't make it into the book, was there was a chief of police of Paris. His name was Nicolas de la Reynie, and he was the one who came up with the idea of lighting the streets. And he talked to the king about, should we do this? And they ordered that the streets lit with big sconces hanging in front of all the businesses at every intersection, maybe every 20 or so feet. And the people in the neighborhood were required to go out and light these candles at night. But it changed Paris from being this dark, very violent city at night to being lit up and being relatively safe. I'm not going to say 100% safe, but that's kind of where it got its name, City of Light. And this chief of police himself was just an intriguing man. I have a book just on him, and I'm working on a entirely different series, a mystery series that takes place at the same time. And he is featured. My heroine in that series is a young woman who's the daughter of an apothecary, and she clashes with this Nicolas de la Reynie all the time, but they have to pair up in order to solve their mysteries. So to me, he's just very, very intriguing character.
Very cool. So what's next for Sylvian? I don't want to give away the ending or anything, but will there be a follow-up?
There is a sequel, and to my delight, people are begging for the sequel. So yes, there.
Me too.
What's that?
Me too.
Oh yeah, good.
Yeah.
Good. So she will have some new adventures. She will meet some new people. She will grow in her own way. So yeah, there's definitely a second book.
More to come. Dot.
Yes, absolutely.
Wonderful.
Yeah. And then that second book will draw a lot more from the experiences of my specific ancestors. So,
Oh, that's so cool. Oh,
yeah.
wonderful.
Yeah. In fact, originally I had envisioned this all as one book, but as I got into Sylviane and her backstory and where she was coming from, where she was going, and what was going to lead up to the end of the book, it just became obvious. In fact, it's kind of long already in its iteration. So then it was like, oh yeah, this definitely has to be 2 books.
Yeah, for sure. Just 2?
Well, I don't know. I mean, there could be a third one. I haven't thought a lot that far ahead. I have some ideas if I decide to go in that direction,
Yeah.
but we'll see.
Yeah. So what is your typical writing day like? Are you a plotter? Do you gather the facts and then pants it all out, or what do you do?
I'm a plotter in that I write a narrative outline. And I fill that outline as I research and as I come up with ideas. For this book, I started with where I knew it was going to end up and kind of work backwards. You know, what led up to that and what led up to each piece. And it put that into a narrative outline. And then that narrative outline kind of grows into the manuscript. From there, I kind of become a pantser because I don't write sequentially. I write as scenes come to me, as things speak to me, and then I can go in and fill in what's needed to make everything connected. As I get my first draft finished and I'm ready to do my revisions, then I actually do go back and I create a very specific outline that's kind of on a chart. And I can have, each of the scenes, I can have what time of year, what time of day it is. I can have what pages it's going to cover, because the time frame was something that I really had to work with to make it work. And even in this book, there were at least one time, if not a couple of times, where I went, oh my gosh, I've got her at this age, or I've got her doing that, or I said something that's really 6 months apart and I made it sound like it's 1 month apart. So when I'm ready to revise, I really want to have my time flow working and know where the scenes come. So then I actually make a pretty formal outline for the purpose of keeping track of my revision.
Oh, wow. It's so different than the way I do things because I'm mostly a pantser, but I'm not a historical fiction writer either. So
Right.
I'm not required to do a lot of that research that you must really need to do.
Yeah, because the time frame, I needed the time frame to mesh with historical time frames. So I needed her age to mesh with the king's age. And I needed things to happen. So like in the spring, and I needed to know what the weather was likely going to have been like then. I have things that take place around Easter. So I needed to know when Easter was in relation to the first of the year, because that changes every year.
Right.
And I was able to find out, for that year where it was. And there's always going to be somebody who knows that kind of stuff.
Oh,
And
yeah.
if you mess it up, they're going to call you on it. So
That's right. Yep. In that year, spring was on this date.
yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, they will. Somebody will notice. So I think it's really important.
Yeah.
So where can readers find Courting the Sun or your other books?
So it's available at Amazon. It's available at Barnes and Nobles, bookshop.org. I really encourage people to make use of their local independent bookstores. It can be ordered through any of them. I'm going to start a sort of a campaign to try to get it into libraries in every state in the union. Not every library in every state, but just trying to get people to get it into libraries. Yeah, and so people can find me. I have a website peggywilliamsauthor.com, and on Facebook, Peggy Jock Williams will get you to me.
Great. Spelled just like it is here.
Yeah.
So,
I hope to.
thank you so, yes. It's a beautiful cover, by the way.
It is. I get a lot of compliments on it. There's a young gentleman at my publishing company that does most of their covers, and he hit it out of the ballpark on the first try. I couldn't believe it. I get a lot of compliments on it.
Yeah, no, it's amazing and very, eye-catching.
Yeah,
So,
yeah.
yeah, congratulations.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for joining me today. And I will see you around Wisconsin, and and I'm really looking forward to your next book, Peggy.
Oh, good. Thank you so much. And thank you for having me on.
Yeah, no problem.